It's 4:03, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm the interim first year experience program coordinator. Excited to have y'all here. Excited to have one of our staff here with us conducting or facilitating our workshop today on how to thrive in your online classes. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass off the virtual mic to Kelsey Pais.
All right, thank you so much. So hi, everyone. I am Kelsey Pais, and I am an adjunct instructor of communication studies here at Diablo Valley College. I am also the faculty tutoring coordinator for the San Ramon campus of DVC. And I am really excited to give this workshop. I've given this workshop a couple of times over the course of the last couple of years, and I really hope that it will be a valuable resource to you. So a little bit more background on me. As I said, I teach communication studies, and I have been here at DVC since about 2018, and I have been teaching online ever since I've been here at DVC. So I've had the privilege of teaching online for several years now. I have a lot of experience in teaching online, and these are just some of the tips and tricks that I've picked up over the course of my work from my students and trying to help my students to succeed in my classes. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. So let me go ahead and share my screen with y'all so you can see my slideshow. All right, there we go. Okay. Just trying to get my chat and stuff situated. There we are. Working on a different computer than the one that I'm used to, so it takes a little bit of getting used to here. All right. So as Zaria said at the beginning, this is the How to Thrive in Your Online Classes workshop. And I said earlier, I'm Kelsey Pais, and I am an instructor in communication studies. So in this workshop, we are going to be covering a handful of things. So we're going to start by talking about getting yourself organized and the importance of organization when it comes to taking an online course. We will talk about making and keeping a schedule. We will, oh, this is the wrong PowerPoint, hold on. Oh no, it's the right one, it's just very strange. Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk about making and keeping a schedule, getting organized, staying engaged, practicing good netiquette, email etiquette, Zoom etiquette, and then finally minding your mindset. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about making and keeping a schedule and the importance of, maintaining a schedule over the course of your taking an online course. And first and foremost is one of the great benefits of taking an online course is that it gives you so much flexibility, right? Especially if you're taking an asynchronous course where there are no designated meeting times for the class. You can basically do your work whenever you want. But the downside of that is that our brains kind of kick in and they say, oh, well, I could just do that later. And so you kind of have to create a structure for yourself so that you can complete all of the work that needs to be done. Ultimately, the schedule that works best for you is the one that you can actually follow. And one of the best things that you can do is to decide on a day of the week where you sit down, open up a planner and build your schedule, right? So this might be the Sunday before classes begin the next week. It might be Monday morning. It's the first thing that you do is to open up your schedule, take a look at all of the different, stuff that you have to do that week, that sort of thing. And when you are sitting down and building this schedule every week, you want to start by plugging in what are called the non-negotiables, right? So these are things that have to happen, whether they are at specific times or they just have to happen, period, that week. So this can include things like synchronous online meetings. This can include your work schedule outside of class. But this also includes time for self-care, right? So time to do things like eat and sleep and bathe. And it might seem kind of silly to work those into a schedule, but if you are someone who just has a lot going on in their life, things like remembering to eat lunch sometimes can be a challenge. And so we do want to make sure that we are taking care of our bodies and nourishing our bodies so that we can continue to be productive in all of those synchronous meetings and work schedules and all of those different things that we have to take care of. And so sitting down and plugging these things in, taking like 20 minutes out of the beginning of the week can really help you to just see what your week is going to be looking like. After you have those sort of non-negotiable items, you can start plugging in other responsibilities and events that you might want to go to. So for example, you can look through the syllabi for your classes or the Canvas page for your class and take a look and see, okay, when is it that I have to have the quiz due for my comm class? Or when do I have to turn in that assignment for my econ class, right? And you can put in those deadlines and then figure out the times that will work for you to be able to work on those assignments or submit those assignments, and work that around those non-negotiable times where you are in meetings or at work. So, you know, look through, see if you have an exam due that week. Do you have a quiz? Like in my classes, for example, my students have weekly quizzes that they have to take by a certain time. Do you have a paper coming up? Do you have a big project coming up? Do you have weekly discussion boards that you have to complete for your class? And discussion boards are a trickier one, right? Because oftentimes faculty will ask you to submit twice to the discussion board. I know that when I have discussion boards in my classes, my students have to post on 2 separate days at least within the discussion board. So I have 2 deadlines where they have to post once by Wednesday, and then they have to post 2 more times by Sunday. And as long as they post on 2 separate days, I'm good. So, you know, if they post on Tuesday and then Wednesday, like that's fine by me. But that's something that you would have to know and like check your syllabus, talk with your instructor, and figure out like when you are going to post those discussion board responses each week. And so once you kind of are looking through this and you can prioritize, right? Maybe it's more important for you to study for the exam in your one class that week, and it's less important for you to do the discussion board, or it's going to take you less time to do the discussion board. You can start to figure out how you want to prioritize those things. As I said earlier, the schedule that works best for you is the one that you will actually follow. And going along with this idea, you want to make sure that you are using the tools that are best suited to your needs, right? So for example, you could potentially use a calendar on your phone. You could use a calendar on your computer. You could use a good old-fashioned paper planner where, you know, you're sitting down and opening up your book and writing it in with pens and color coding and doing all of those fun things. There's also several different apps that you can potentially use to create a schedule. Me personally, I use Google Calendar for my scheduling purposes. So I have it in there whenever I am teaching a class. I have it listed in my calendar when I have meetings such as this one that I am hosting. I have in there when I have to attend other meetings, right? And so that helps me to keep track of what I am doing each week. And the thing that I like about Google is that I can use it across my devices. So I can pull it up on my work computer here. I can pull it up on my computer at home. I have it on my iPad. I have it on my phone. It's just everywhere, and it's super easy for me to be able to access. I also have created separate calendars within Google Calendars. So you can create like a calendar for work, a calendar for school, right? I work at several different campuses. So I have one for DVC and one for the other college that I work for, and one for just like personal life events. And it's all color coded, which helps me to keep track of like what campus I need to be on any given day, right? And so ultimately, you have to use the tool that is best suited for you, right? So if you are someone who loves to take the time to write things down, and maybe you like to doodle and stuff like that, maybe a paper planner is the right tool for you. But if you are like me and you buy a paper planner at the beginning of every year in January with the intention of, filling it out and following it and doing all these things and then forgetting about it by January 15th, paper planner might not be the tool for you, right? But ultimately, the most important thing to remember about keeping a schedule is that there is no wrong way to go about it. As long as you have some method of keeping track of these things and writing these things down and have one place to kind of look at everything at one time, that is going to help you to be able to keep track of things a lot more easily. So does anybody have any questions about making and keeping a schedule yet, or anything else that I've talked about so far? All good? Okay. And you can interact with me. I know that I see that nobody has their cameras on, which is fine. For me, it's always an invitation rather than like a request, right? So if you feel like turning your camera on and saying hi, that's fine by me. But if you want to stay anonymous, that's also fine. But if you could interact with me with the emojis on Zoom, that would be helpful to me, just so that I know that you're following along, that you're understanding, and that I'm good to move on. Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate that. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so that's making and keeping a schedule. So up next, we are going to talk about getting yourself organized. And part of this comes like out of creating the schedule, but part of it is just being organized in your space as well. So one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to have an organized workspace. And I know that this can be difficult to do when you are working from home and taking your classes from home, and maybe you don't have a dedicated workspace. Maybe you are just, zooming in from your bedroom in your parents' house where you have, your 4 siblings, and maybe you have like a niece and nephew running around or something like that, right? Everybody's workspaces are totally different. But the more that you can organize some sort of workspace, the better off you will be and the more successful you can be. So you want to set up a space in your house that has everything you need. So if you have access to a desk in your room or in a separate room or whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have things like reliable Wi-Fi and an updated computer. So often I have students who have Wi-Fi issues when they are coming into class, and sometimes that's something that is just completely out of our control, unfortunately. But if you can have access to reliable Wi-Fi, whether that means that maybe you're coming to campus to use the Wi-Fi here, or maybe you have to use your phone as a hotspot and use your phone's data in order to access class, right? But you want to figure out the system that works best for you in your situation so that you can make sure that you can attend a Zoom meeting without it freezing during a presentation and things like that. It's also important to have an updated computer because there are security updates and, tool updates and things like that that are happening all the time. And as an example, right, in Zoom, there was an update a few months ago that allowed students to be able to select their own breakout room if the facilitator of that meeting had enabled that function. And this was only possible if you had an updated version of Zoom, right? If you had gone through a software update. And so I had a lot of students who I said, okay, go ahead and select your rooms. And then they couldn't do it because they hadn't updated their software. So you want to make sure that, you're keeping things up to date so that you don't get a virus, so that your security is good, so that you have the added features that might have been added by a company, all of that sort of stuff. So you just want to, keep an eye on that and keep things up to date. It's also a good idea to try to have good lighting in the space that you are in and to have minimal noise and distractions whenever possible, because even though you are taking a class online, you want to be able to focus on what you're doing. And this is one of the things that I pick on sort of with my public speaking students are things like good lighting, right? You want to make sure that if you are on camera, that you are sufficiently well lit. So often I have students who are sitting with their back to a window and all of the light is coming in behind them and they end up being really backlit. Which makes it difficult for me to see them, or else they are sitting in a completely darkened room and it looks like they're part of the witness protection program, right? So you want to make sure you have good lighting if you have your camera on so that the facilitator of the class can see you and like see your interactions and things like that. And you also, like I was saying, want to try to have minimal noise and distractions whenever possible, so that you can really focus on what is happening in class. It's also a good idea in your workspace to have the materials that you need at the ready, right? So if you have a desk, for example, you want to have a designated space where you have your notebooks and your pens and any highlighters that you might need, your textbooks, and just have it all nice and easy to access, easy to find. The more organized that you are, the easier your life is, because you aren't like frantically looking around going, God, where is my communication studies textbook? I know that I left my notebook around here somewhere. Where's a pen, right? If you are able to have everything in one nice space, you can easily like take notes during class and stuff like that. In addition to an organized workspace, it's a good idea to have to figure out how to organize your class content. So like we were saying with all of the scheduling stuff before, you want to make sure that you are staying on top of your various class requirements and deadlines. And this can get really confusing with different classes because, for example, you might have two classes that have discussion boards. And in one class, your discussion boards are due on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And in your other class, your discussion boards are due on Wednesdays and Sundays. And that can get really confusing, right? Because you're like, wait, was it the comm class that I needed to do Tuesday, Thursday? Or was it my econ class that I needed to do Sunday, Wednesday? Like, what was it, right? And that's why taking that time to look at your schedule, to plan out what is due when, maybe even to set aside a designated time where you're like, okay, and on Tuesdays at 3 p.m., I have an open space in my schedule. So I'm going to go through and do all of the discussion boards for all of my classes at that time and just get them all out of the way. And so it can be useful to kind of group your assignments in that way as well. So you want to, figure out what is due when, what requirements are in place for different classes, and all of that kind of stuff. And we just had someone else join us, so I do want to say welcome really quickly. This is the How to Thrive in Your Online Class workshop. So we're currently talking about getting organized. One hot tip that I have for keeping yourself organized is to make a folder or a notebook for every class that you are in. What I liked to do when I was a student was I had different colored notebooks or different colored folders for each of my classes. And that was where I took my notes. So I knew that, my red folder was for math, my blue folder was for English, that sort of thing. I would take all my notes in that notebook. I usually bought the notebooks that had pockets built in, so it had a folder kind of built into it. So I would print out the syllabus and the class schedule for that course. I would stick that into the notebook so that I could easily refer to it. I even went so far as like highlighting the syllabus each week so that I knew like which week I was on, what was due that week, all of that kind of stuff. I just found that really helpful in keeping my brain organized so that I could easily reference back to those different resources that I was given. So like I was saying, you can keep a copy of your syllabus and other essential documents. Maybe you could keep like the rubric for an assignment or the study guide that your instructor gave out, right? Things like that. It's just really helpful to be able to grab something, whether it's a folder or a notebook, and say, this is what I need for my math class. This is what I need for my English class, right? And so on. And then you want to be sure that you review the course calendar at least once per week. On the slide here, I have an example of what my course calendar looks like for my online classes. So as you can see, I have it broken down on the left-hand side by week with the dates. And then on the right-hand side, I have all of the information that my students need. So it tells them what topics we're covering that particular week, what chapters we are going to be going over, and then in bold, it tells them what assignments they need to do by the end of that week. So for example, in week 2, you can see here, it says that they need to do quiz number 1 and that they need to do discussion number 1 by Sunday at 9 p.m. Right, and that's pretty consistent for all of the weeks. And then, oh, there's something else due in week 7, right? They have to submit their rough draft outline of their first big speeches. And then, oh, look, they have a speech due in week 8, right? So reviewing that course calendar and taking a look at what's due, not only that week, but maybe in the upcoming weeks in case you have a big assignment coming up, can be really helpful in staying organized and in creating your schedule for that week as well. So any questions on getting organized? Oh, I saw a hand. Hold on, where did it go? Jeff.
Oh, there. Okay, so as you know, I work 40 hours a week, and I found one actually good thing that that I could do on Canvas that I brought that actually helps me out with my organization. So in Canvas, you could color code your classes on Google Calendar where it syncs in. And what I do with that, what I do with that, the color code is I actually have a whiteboard that matches whatever color for class I have, and I use what I need to write. You know, whatever's due on that class, I'll write it in that particular color on the whiteboard. So that actually helps me out with organization and what needs to be done.
That's so cool. I didn't know that Canvas talked to Google Calendars in that way.
Yeah, it does. So, well, because it doesn't come up on Google Calendar so often. It'll pop up like once in a while. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But sure. In Canvas, you can still do the color coding on there itself. But I mainly said the Google thing just because it syncs up with everything and does reminders and yeah. So. And I could attest to your organization with your desktop, your workspace too. Because last term when I had you, my workstation space there was like a mess. But like I said, I just moved to Martinez where everything's all nice and organized. It's so much better.
Yeah.
So, yeah, an organized workspace is definitely a lot better than a messy one.
Yeah, I know personally that when I am super stressed, likely my workspace is a hot mess and that often is contributing to that stress because I'm just like, oh, like there's so many different things happening right now. So yeah, great tip with the Canvas calendars. Like I didn't realize you could color code those, so that's exciting to me.
So where the dots meet up, or just click the dots and it'll give you a choice of what color you want to put it. So
okay, awesome.
Yeah, then. So there you go.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for that tip, Jeff.
No problem.
And like Jeff said, right, he has just a whiteboard in his workspace where he coordinates the colors with what's on Canvas for him. And he figures out like what's due for that particular week. So having some kind of consistency like that can really be helpful. So thank you so much for that example, Jeff. Appreciate that. And I think we just had someone else join us. Hello. This is the How to Thrive in Your Online Class workshop, and we're just wrapping up talking about getting organized. Any other questions or contributions to this conversation before we move on? Okay. All right, then. Up next, I want to talk about staying engaged in your online classes because I feel like this is one of the most challenging aspects of online courses, just because Zoom is kind of an awkward space if you have a synchronous class because there's not necessarily a space for you to like chat with your classmates before or after class, right? When class is over, the meeting just ends. And in my experience, at least, when the class begins, most people are not chit-chatting beforehand. And I really feel like that's one of the lost elements of online teaching versus in-person teaching, is that ability to, connect with your classmates and connect with your professor, and to stay engaged with the course in that way. And we just had someone else join us. Hello. Welcome to the How to Thrive in Your Online Class workshop. So one of the things that you can do to stay engaged in your online classes is to really just try to tap into the community of your online class in any way that you can. One of these ways might be through the discussion boards. So we can think of discussion boards kind of like the heart of the online classroom in a lot of ways. And I have very mixed feelings about discussion boards personally, because I feel that they tend to be fairly dry and monotonous, and that can very easily breed a not very engaging environment. But if there is effort put into the discussion boards, both by the instructor and by the students, they can be really important places of community. So if your class does discussion boards, right, it's a great space for you to be able to introduce yourself and get to know your classmates as well. And it's a good idea to check the boards and to post and respond to the discussion boards regularly. So read through what your classmates are saying, and look into their insights, get an idea of how they're thinking about these particular subjects that you're discussing that week. And that can really help you to engage with one another and say, oh, I didn't think of it that way, or responding to each other, just like having that interaction with one another. It's usually a good idea to converse, to discuss on the discussion boards, because so often it can be tempting to just say, I agree or I disagree, and kind of leave it at that. But you really, the discussion board should be a place of conversation. It should be a place where we are having these discussions about whatever topic it is for that week, and really just trying to come to a mutual understanding about what the topic is for that week. Another thing that we can do in our online classes is to work to build our network. So one of the first things that I encourage my students to do in my class is to exchange contact information with each other. In my public speaking classes, we always start off by having an introduction speech where students are introducing each other. They're introducing a partner. And so on that very first day of class, they go into a breakout room with one other student, and I tell them to exchange contact info with that person, because A, if they get disconnected from Zoom for some reason, they can still reach out to their partner. And B, now they have a buddy in the class. So whenever you go into breakout rooms during synchronous sessions with your classmates, or if you are asynchronous, maybe you could try to reach out to your classmates via Canvas Messenger, but reach out, right? Exchange contact info with somebody in the class and get to know them, because that can be a lifeline for you in the class. It's also a really good idea to create study groups, right? You can, like I said, oftentimes you can use Canvas Messenger to reach out to individual members of your class or to the entire class and see if anybody wants to form a study group. I had students in my COM 123, my argumentation and debate class that I taught last year. They created a Discord channel for themselves where they all got together and talked about the class and helped each other out, and worked on their debate assignments together and all that kind of stuff. And it was this really cool, that class was just so fantastic as far as community goes. And I feel like it has a lot to do with the fact that my students were connecting with each other outside of class hours. And so the more that you can do to reach out to your classmates, to connect with them, the more engaged you will be with your class. So creating study groups is a great way to do that, because you not only get to meet other people and Even if the study groups are happening via Zoom, you still get to like meet and get to know other people and like chat about your various problems that you might be having at school or various stresses that you might be experiencing. But you also get to relieve that burden somewhat because you are working with other people who might understand a concept better than you, and you might understand a different concept better than they do. And so study groups can be really beneficial in the learning process, even if they're happening virtually, like on Zoom, for example. So that's another big tip that I have for staying engaged with your classes is really just, building that network and not being afraid to reach out and say, hey, anybody want to form a study group for this? So those are some of the ways that you can stay engaged in your online class, whether they are synchronous or asynchronous. Any questions about that? Okay. Alrighty then. So up next then, I want to talk about practicing good netiquette. So I feel like this is kind of an antiquated term, but netiquette is basically just etiquette, but online. And there's just some kind of rules of the road that we should be trying to practice at all times whenever we are in online spaces. So netiquette, like I said, refers to appropriate email and online etiquette. And so, unless you are told otherwise by your instructor, it's generally a good idea to address your instructors using their proper title, such as, for me, it would be Professor Pais. But, me personally, I don't mind if my students call me Kelsey, right? I don't mind if they call me Miss Pais, or like I had one student refer to me just as Miss Teacher for the entire semester. Pretty sure he just didn't know my name, but he just called me Miss Teacher, and I thought it was kind of adorable, actually. So ultimately, like, go by what your professor says, right? Or like how they sign off their emails is often a good way to figure that out. But when in doubt, just go with professor last name. That's really your best course of action. So Professor Smith, Dr. Doe, that sort of thing. It's always, always, always imperative to be respectful of your instructors and your classmates. And we just had someone else join us. Hello, welcome. This is the How to Thrive in Your Online Course workshop. So we are currently just talking about netiquette. So as I was saying, it's important for us to always be respectful of both your instructor and of other students, even and perhaps especially when you disagree about something, right? Discussion boards can sometimes be about controversial issues, and it can be tempting to be the sort of like troll behind the screen and to forget the fact that behind that screen is a human being. And so it's really important to remember the human and to treat each other with the respect that we would expect to get from our instructor and our classmates. It's also a good idea to practice being both thorough as well as concise with communication that we share online. This is a skill that we can improve over time and with practice, but it is something that does require practice, right? It takes a lot of practice to be able to get a message across in a way that is not terribly time consuming, but also that gets the entirety of the message across. So, when you're sending an email, do you have to send an email that is 500 words long or 500 words long? Probably not. Right? You can probably get away with a much shorter email and still get the severity of the situation across to the recipient. In general, when you are online, you want to avoid using capital letters because it may be interpreted as yelling. So you have to be careful with the way that text messages are perceived versus verbal messages, right? And this is something that we talk a lot about in communication studies courses. You know, even different emojis can have different meanings. So it's important to be aware of the messages that you're sending and the way that those messages might be interpreted. Along similar lines, in professional correspondence, especially, for example, with your instructor, if you are emailing them, for example, you want to avoid sort of text speak, as it were, using abbreviations like LOL, OMG, SMH for shake my head, saying you instead of you, right? And thanks, THX instead of THANKS, those sorts of things. And again, different professors will have different expectations, especially with regards to discussion boards. Me personally, I don't mind if my students are like, if they say LOL in the discussion board, right? I'm not going to chastise them for that, because that's just like a natural thing that we do when we're communicating via text these days. But it is something to keep in mind when you are professionally corresponding with somebody else. Is that generally speaking, we want to avoid those types of abbreviations. You also want to be sure that you are using sarcasm wisely when you are in online spaces, and this is especially true if you are in text-based online spaces, because sarcasm can be really difficult to pick up in text. When you are saying something sarcastically, right, your voice kind of gets that across. It's like, it's a tonal thing, right? But if you say something sarcastically in text, it can be completely misinterpreted and can have some pretty dire consequences. So you do want to be careful. And I know that I can be pretty sarcastic sometimes, and this is something that I have to check myself on sometimes. And then finally, the last kind of general rule of netiquette is to think before you post. So this is an acronym, and you have to think, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And if you can answer yes to all of those questions, then go ahead and post it, right? But if you are questioning the truth of what you are about to post, if you aren't sure of the source that it came from, for example, if what you are about to post isn't really helping the conversation along, if you know, what you are about to say is maybe not the nicest way of putting something, it's a good opportunity to stop and think about how you might communicate that message otherwise. Because what you write online can be found later on, right? Whether that's in an email or a website or a tweet or whatever it is, if it's posted somewhere, it can be found. And so you want to be aware of, you know, sending out messages when you might be feeling particularly agitated or emotional, especially. And just, you know, be aware that that record is going to exist if you hit send. So just some things to think about when it comes to general etiquette online. So are there any questions or contributions surrounding these ideas? Okay. Quiet bunch today. So in addition to just sort of this general idea of etiquette, it's also a good idea to keep in mind some of the basic etiquettes of email responding or email correspondence. So in addition to the things that we talked about, like addressing your professors correctly and, you know, avoiding those abbreviations in professional correspondence, you also want to make sure that you write a brief and useful subject line so that the recipient of your message knows what they are getting into going in. For example, I, at the beginning of a semester, get a lot of emails from students who want to add my course, right? Who are trying to add it after the initial registration deadline. And so if the student emails me and just says, like, adding course, and then, hey, I want to add your course, can you send me a code? I'm sitting there like, honey, I teach 5 courses. Which one do you want added to, right? And so being specific, being like having that useful information available helps me to help you a lot more easily. remember that email is a separate medium from text messages. So the type of email that you're going to send is going to look different from a text message that you might send to a friend. So for example, you want to make sure that you include salutations and sign-offs, right? So you want to say, for example, dear Professor Pais, or dear, or like, hi Kelsey, or whatever, right? Starting off that email with a salutation and then signing off at the end. And this is so important, and it's underrated because just put your name at the end of the email. I can't tell you from a student, and they have emailed me from their personal email account. And this personal email account isn't one that they set up when they were an adult, right? It was one that they set up when they were like 10, 11, 12 years old. And so I'm getting these random emails from like Skater Boy 420. And I'm just like, hi, Skater Boy, who are you? Because they didn't sign off with their name. And so you want to make sure that you are using an email that is appropriate for professional correspondence. And B, that you tell the recipient who you are. And in addition to your name, you always want to include the full class code when corresponding with an instructor. And this is because, like I said earlier, we often teach multiple different sections of the same course. We often teach different courses, and some of us are teaching at multiple different colleges even. And so you want to make our lives as easy as possible if you need help with something, and just telling us, hey, I'm in your COM 120 section 9424 can help us to help you so much more easily, because now I know exactly which course you're in. I know what the deadlines are for that specific course, and I can tell you what the assignment requirements are, or when the quiz is due, or whatever, right? Whereas if you don't tell me that information, I have to respond to you saying, hi, which class are you in? Or I have to go in and like look up what class you're in and search through all my rosters. And that's going to take me a lot of time to be able to get back to you. So if you just include that information from the off, that makes all of our lives so much easier. So always include your name, always include the full class code. In addition, if you are sending any kind of attachment to somebody else, always make sure that those attachments can be opened. And this is something to be aware of with regards to the format of the attachment. So for example, if you have a Mac and you use either Pages or Numbers or what's the other one? Keynote. Those file types, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, can't be read by anything other than a Mac. So for example, I have both, right? I have a Mac and I have a PC. My work computer is a PC. And so if a student were to send me something on a Pages file, I would not be able to open that on my work computer, right? I can open Word documents, I can open Google documents, but I can't open Mac documents. So you want to make sure that you put it into a more common file type so that it is accessible by the person that is going to be receiving that message. PDF is always a safe bet. It's also a general good rule of etiquette to avoid hitting that reply all button to a mass email unless it's absolutely necessary to do so. Because I can't tell you how many times, and like even faculty are not great at this, because I get so many emails on a daily basis where everybody's just responding to one thread saying congratulations or something like that. And it gets really annoying and it clogs up my inbox, right? So unless you have something that absolutely needs to be seen by everybody in that thread, just hit reply, right? If you are asking a specific question that only relates to you, and that might have some private sensitive information, make sure you're hitting reply and not reply all, because you don't want all of that information going to everybody in the class, for example. So be wary of the reply all button. And pro tip, it's almost never necessary to reply all. 90 times out of 100, you will not have to hit reply all. And then finally, you want to make sure that you are responding to email messages in a timely manner. For faculty, right, like I set an expectation for myself and for my students that I will respond to my students' emails within 24 hours on a weekday. And so they know that if they email me on a Tuesday at 3 p.m., that I will get back to them by Wednesday at 3 p.m. And if they don't hear from me by then, they can bump the email up in my inbox just in case I missed it somehow. And kind of in relation to that, right, you want to be sure that you are giving the recipient time to see your email. Because even though we have phones and we have watches and we're so connected these days, you know, it's also really important to take time away and to, you know, not always be checking email. And so it might just be that your professor hasn't checked their email in the last hour, or maybe they're in class, or maybe they're doing a presentation and they can't respond to you right away. So it's important to give them the time to see your message and be able to respond to it before completely freaking out that they're just not going to respond to you. So those are kind of my general email etiquette tips. Any questions or comments about that?
Can you guys still hear me okay? Can I get some thumbs up? My headphones with my microphone just
very low. I'm not sure if it's just me though.
let me check my settings really
Oh
quick.
wait, I think it might just be me. I just increased my
Let me check my audio settings. Turn my microphone up a little bit.
Oh yeah, that helped out.
That's better.
Yeah, can y'all give us a thumbs up if you can hear Kelsey?
You can hear me okay?
It looks like Megan can.
Oh, let's not automatically adjust. Let's let Kelsey adjust it. There we go. That's better. Okay. Sorry about that. My AirPods just like are not charging correctly. Another rule of technology, make sure your technology is working correctly when you are giving an important presentation. Anywho, let's talk about some Zoom etiquette next. So first is appropriately test your tech before you get into a Zoom meeting. I had been wearing my AirPods for the last hour before I hopped on this meeting, so naturally they have a very limited lifespan. So you want to make sure that your microphone is going to work. You want to make sure that your camera is functioning properly if you need to be on camera, and make sure that your settings are correct in Zoom. So for example, I just had to go in and boost up my microphone volume because Zoom was doing an automatic adjustment thing. So, you know, when you get to class, unmute to say hello to your professor, make sure that your microphone is working, make sure that your camera is working, all of that kind of stuff. Check your Wi-Fi, get familiar with the software, right? So familiarize yourself with Zoom or with Canvas or whatever it is. Generally speaking, if you are in a meeting or in a class, a lot of professors will ask you to turn your mics off and your cameras on. This really does help to create an engaging classroom, having the cameras on especially because it helps us as professors to get to know you, but it also helps you as students get to know one another. And so, like I was saying before, though, in my classes, I don't ever require my students to have their cameras on unless they are giving a speech presentation. That's the only time they have to have their cameras on. But otherwise, I like to invite my students to join me on camera because I don't want anyone to feel forced. I want to acknowledge the fact that all of my students are in their own private spaces, that they are in their homes, and that maybe they don't want to share that with everybody. And so I always say to my students that if you are in the physical and mental space to be able to do so, please join me on camera. But keeping the mics off whenever you are not speaking is a really important tip because this can help you to avoid any kind of accidental background noise or, you know, if a housemate comes into the room and doesn't realize that you're on a call. It can stop from us hearing them saying anything embarrassing, perhaps, right? Just keeping on mute is generally a good idea. Also a good idea to clean up your background, or at the very least be aware of what is in your background. Right now I am using a virtual background because I'm in a pretty plain space. I'm just like in a study room at the San Ramon campus. And I just didn't like the way that the background looked behind me, so I turned on a virtual background. But when I'm at home, I have my bookcases behind me. And so it's a nice, clean, academic looking background. But I've definitely had students before who are giving their speeches who like have piles of laundry on the floor, or who have like a bra slung over the closet door, right? Stuff like that. So aware of what is in your background when you have your camera on Zoom, so that there's not anything that is distracting to your audience, or that is like embarrassing to you, essentially. As I was saying previously, you also want to be sure that you are well lit when you are on camera. So you want any light that is in your room to be coming from in front of you whenever possible. You want sufficient light. So this room that I'm in has overhead fluorescent lights. So I have plenty of light in here. I also have a nice big window in front of me. So I have plenty of light coming in and you all can see me wonderfully. But if I turn the lights off and close the shade, like you wouldn't be able to see anything. So when you're on camera, make it worth it and make sure that you are well lit. So like I was saying before, you don't want any lights behind you. You don't want a big old window super bright behind you, because that will result in backlighting, which makes you look like you are part of witness protection. So we do want to be able to see your face whenever you are on camera. This is another tip that most people don't tend to think about, but it's a tip that I give to my public speaking students all the time and that I'm constantly reminding them of, is that in order to make eye contact with the people in your class, with your audience, with whoever it is that you're talking to on Zoom, you have to look directly into the camera. And that is going to most closely mimic eye contact in face-to-face communication. Because if I'm looking at my Zoom window where all of your names are right now and your profile pictures, to you, it looks like I'm looking slightly down, right? Whereas when I'm looking directly right down the barrel of the camera, now it looks like I'm looking at and talking directly to you. So this can be really tricky though, because you do want to look at your audience, right? You want to, if they have their cameras on, get the nonverbal feedback that they're giving you, see their heads nodding, that sort of thing. And so you do want to glance at your audience, glance at your classmates, so that you can get that feedback. But for the most part, if you're talking on Zoom, you should be trying to look into that camera so that you are making eye contact. If you're giving a presentation, I generally advise that you should stand like you would if you were in a classroom, right? So often I get students who are sitting down and like the camera is looking up at them and their camera is like this, right? Where I can like just see the top of their head, or like I'm looking up their nose or something like that. So you do want the camera to be at eye level. Maybe back yourself up from the camera a little bit so that your audience can see more of you and they can see your gestures and things like that. If you are not able to stand, right? Because some folks, like their setup doesn't give them enough space to be able to push back from their cameras, perhaps. And so you want to just basically put as much of yourself into the frame as you can. And I realize now that I was sitting very close before, but you want to put as much of yourself into the frame as you can so that you can see gestures and stuff like that. It's also good in Zoom to use those nonverbal feedback features when you are listening to someone, especially if you're not in the physical or mental space to be able to be on camera that day. It's a really good idea to, oh my gosh, I am running on time, to use the thumbs up and, the reaction emojis and things like that. And then finally, just be professional on Zoom, right? be on time, dress appropriately, don't Zoom from bed, all of those sorts of things, okay? And so then really quickly, I just want to talk about your mindset. So ultimately, like, your mindset determines your experience. So if you go into an online class thinking that this is not going to be going well, that this class is going to suck, that this isn't going to be a very fun experience, then that is ultimately the experience that you're going to have, right? It creates a feedback loop. So one of the things that you can do to keep your mindset in check is to write down the goals that you have, right? Write down the reasons why you were taking that course. Commit yourself to that class and you will do the work, because if you have that goal, you will do whatever is necessary to achieve that goal, and to fulfill the reason that you took that course. And ultimately, online classes are really helpful, right? They help us to be better critical thinkers. They help us to be problem solvers. They help us to be better learners. They give us the ability to stretch our critical thinking skills and to be able to solve any problems that might happen with our technology as we're presenting. And then finally, just like one of the best things that we can do in online learning and in learning in general is just staying curious. Right? Staying curious, asking questions, find something interesting in everything that you do, in every class that you take, in every workshop that you attend, right? Find something that is interesting in all of those instances, and that will help you to succeed. So thank you all so much for your time. I'm sorry I kind of rushed at the end there. Communication studies person, can't get me to shut up. But I hope that this workshop was helpful to you. I hope that you feel ready to thrive in your online courses. And Zaria, did you want to remind